Frank Klose will be all over the Phillies, of course, this season, and he joins us now with a Phillies preview and predictions here on the Sports Bash. Just an hour from first pitch, we hope, down in Atlanta. Frank, welcome back, pal. How are you?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Good, man. A lot to get into, obviously, with opening day here. The expectations have spiked for this team with some of the offseason acquisitions. But let's start right off the bat with today's lineup. I mean, we kind of tried to speculate. We didn't really know for sure. But were you surprised with some of the changes and some of the tweaks to today's opening day lineup? And what's the message?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a shocker. If for no other reason, teams typically play their everyday lineup what it's going to be most of the time on the first game, even if it's not the ideal matchup. But it looks like Gabe Kapler is going to try to win today and try to do everything he can to do so, even if it means, in his opinion, putting in a better lineup, even though it doesn't have Odubel Herrera. And I was actually kind of shocked that after all this in the spring with the pitcher hitting 8th, the pitcher is now hitting 9th.
Right. I mean, that was something that was a little bit of a surprise. But let's go to Herrera. I mean, what's the message there? I mean, is this Kapler's way of saying, you know what? I don't know what you guys have seen in Herrera, but I'm not seeing it. Or is this a way to light a little fire under him? Or does he just say, you know what? Opening day, and I'm going to go with the better defensive player with my number one pitcher on the mound.
Yeah, I think in a way it's kind of what Pete was saying a little while ago, that, someone like him, he's going to be in the lineup plenty, and you can tell him, like, well, look, today just doesn't happen to be your day, but you're going to be in the lineup a lot going forward. So there's always the chance that something happened that we don't know. Once in a while something will happen, and they often do a good job keeping it under wraps. But I was a little surprised that Nick Williams, though, would be batting in Herrera's spot, batting third, because Williams hasn't really hit third for the Phillies, even in this new Gabe Kapler-esque lineup. But I think the lineup is pretty good in that he kind of balances it out with lefties, righties, because Julio Teheran, who is a pretty tough righty that they're facing, will probably at some point leave the game because pitchers don't go more than 6 innings most of the time anymore. And then they'll be ready for the bullpen and have a nice little balance there. But the Herrera thing, I don't know if we should read too much into it yet. Other than he's trying to win every single day, and if he really thinks that the Altair and Williams in the lineup give him a better matchup, he's going to do that.
Frank, the opening day roster is also set, and I don't know if there's any surprises, but obviously Jake Arrieta is going to start at single A Clearwater just so that he can get another appearance in before he comes up. But was there any real surprises to this roster? The Kingery move was a surprise, but that had already happened. The 25-man final roster that they put out this morning, which is a little late for some of these teams, to be putting a roster out on actually opening day. You usually see it a little bit before that, but was there any – I don't see a big surprise. Any surprise to you?
Well, I thought they might actually just keep Arrieta on the roster to open the season, even if he wasn't going to pitch. Now, with a lot of veterans, you can't option them without their permission, so I'm sure he just agreed to be optioned. And I actually wouldn't be shocked if this is just a paper move. Maybe Arrieta is actually with the team. I haven't checked yet, but he might be with the team in Atlanta, and he might go with them from Atlanta right on north with them to New York. Maybe he never actually pitches again down in Clearwater. He might just throw in New York on the side, like that was a possibility. Or if he wants to fly back and pitch a game at the minor league complex, he can. But really, I think it was just a paperwork move. What that does is it, instead of picking between Edubray Ramos and Victor Arano, they have both of them in the early part of the season where your starting pitchers don't usually go that deep into games anyway. So it just gives them an extra arm for right now. But I didn't think that they might actually send him to the minors, whether it's a paperwork move or not.
So what exactly do you think they're looking for out of Arrieta in that next session to sharpen him up in time? I mean, how many pitches would he throw in his side session, and what exactly do you think that he and they are looking for?
Yeah, I think they'll just want to get him to the point where he's in the 70-ish range so that when he does make a start for the big league club. But, I think it would be tough if he came up and didn't give them at least 5 innings in his first major league start because, even with their bullpen, which is on the larger side, you really realize the effects of a starter going really short into a game, because then your bullpen gets overworked and then things start to fall apart. So I think they're just hopeful that they can get from him enough to go those 5 innings. And plus, maybe that he's optioned. He actually gives the Phillies another opportunity. If for some reason they realize he's not ready to go, you can maybe try to get Drew Hutchison ready to pitch one start if they need to extend it. So, and then they won't have to actually activate him yet because he's not on the active roster. And you can just keep the extra bullpen arm around in that case. So I think they're going forward as if he can pitch on the 8th. And if for some reason he can't, at least they have another arm handy.
If they get in a situation, you mentioned Ramos and Arano, if they get in a situation where they have to choose between those two of who stays and who goes, which one do you think would stay and which one do you think would go?
Well, I think Arano has shown a lot more this spring. I was pretty unimpressed with Ramos throughout the spring, especially his last appearance where he comes in and crosses up Andrew Knapp on the first pitch. It just seems like you should have things together a little bit more. And he remains a very talented arm, but there's still some questions perhaps about his emotional makeup that maybe he needs to kind of calm down a little bit before he can really settle in as a major league pitcher. But Arano looked really good in spring training, and I think, at least we say this now, but you never know what's going to happen, right? So we didn't expect Tommy Hunter to be on the DL and Mark Leiter to be on the DL, Jared Eichhoff to be on the DL, but probably one of those two will end up being options if they're when Arrieta joins the club, and also I would leave room for. Depends on the workload of who's on the team. If, they have a few guys that they can option back and forth, so it might just be a matter of who's the fresher arm that can stick around, and whoever worked the most might have to be optioned just for at least for a while.
Yeah, and it's funny. Here's where spring training stats can be deceiving. You look at Arano's ERA in the spring, 1.93, and you go, well, that's pretty good compared to Ramos' 7.27. But then what jumps out is that Ramos had 17 strikeouts in just 10 games. That was the most by any major league reliever in spring training. So, I mean, you can always skew one way or the other, right?
Well, look at his walks, too. So I thought, sometimes you're unhittable because nobody in their right mind could actually connect with your pitches. So if they're swinging, they might not have a shot.
Frank Klose is with us. Phillies open the season today in Atlanta. Aaron Nola on the hill. So will one of them get moved back to the pen when he's ready to return? About Lively and Pivetta is really what I'm talking about, because until Eichhoff gets back, will one of those guys get moved to the pen when he's ready to return?
Well, really, there's only four starters beyond Arrieta right now that are healthy. So it looks like Lively and Pivetta are there for at least the next however length of time it takes before Jared Eichhoff comes back. So unless, of course, their performance isn't strong, it looks like they're there until they show the Phillies they don't belong, or until Eichhoff comes back from his injury.
Now, that's an interesting scenario that Pete brings up. What if both of those guys are pitching pretty well and Eichhoff is ready? I mean, is Eichhoff that settled into a spot that he would automatically bump one of those guys?
One of those guys, yes. I don't know about the likes of somebody else, like a Velasquez or somebody yet. I think more than finding out what Pivetta and Lively have right now, it's more pressing to find out what Eichhoff and Velasquez have right now. You need to know if they're going to be part of your team's long-term future or not. At least with Lively and Pivetta, you have more time. But the Phillies have given Velasquez, this is year 3, and this is going to be year 3 for Eichhoff essentially, right? So they really need to find out who do they have. Since the two of them they're going to have to make a decision. Are they part of the long-term rotation? Are they not? At least with Lively and Pivetta, you have a while to do that. They can be optioned easily to the minor leagues, even though it might not seem fair. At least they have that option, and you have to look at the club's bigger picture going forward.
Hey, Frank, the bullpen, is Neris the closer? Is it a closer by committee? What kind of sense do you get from how Gabe Kapler is going to use his bullpen?
Well, it sounds like that Kapler is going to go for the best matchup at the right time, and that could be Neris pitching in the 8th, even though he's kind of like he's going to be in that 8th reliever spot, whether you want to call him a closer or not. So if the lead is slim and they think that the 3 outs in the 8th are going to be more important than the 3 outs in the 9th, you might see him use Neris there, and you have a veteran like Pat Neshek and eventually, hopefully, Tommy Hunter, who might be able to just pitch the last 3 outs of the game in the 9th inning and won't necessarily be phased by pitching in the 9th inning. So it's almost like this day's game. You have your relief ace, and then you have your veterans that are okay pitching in the 9th inning. Because people often speak of and former GM Steve Phillips. I was listening to him on a national show talking about how the last 3 outs are very, very different. He's a very experienced GM. But if you get the right veteran arms to surround your relief ace, you can make it work. Like the Indians, when they brought in Andrew Miller, he wasn't quote unquote the closer, and they had another guy who could get 3 outs at the end of the game, and so they just rolled with Miller, whatever it mattered, and they ended up getting the World Series with that.
Frank Klose is with us. Follow him on Twitter at Frank Klose. Now, on our website, 973ESPN.com, we've got our staff predictions and picks. We'll go around the room here and get everybody's take, including Frank's, and kind of give you a full roundtable preview of this season. So, Frank, we'll start with you. What grade would you give the Phillies for their offseason?
Really good question. I would probably give them an A-. I think they didn't overreact in that they didn't get a little too giddy and jump ahead and sign too many players when perhaps ahead of schedule when they should have. But they certainly took advantage of their opportunities in grabbing Arrieta. I thought that signing Santana was a very, very helpful move. And even though it bumped Hoskins to left field, I think Santana is going to get in that veteran bat that they really needed and a bat from the left side that they really, really needed, since he's a switch hitter. So I thought they did pretty well. I would have liked to see if there was a closer option out there. There really wasn't. Greg Holland, by the way, finally signed the contract today, a 1-year, $14 million deal with the Cardinals. But I give the Phillies credit maybe for not pouncing on a Greg Holland too, because they've already given up 2 draft picks. And if they signed Holland, that would be a 3rd draft pick. And, you really still want to have that pipeline going down in the minor leagues. So I think they did an overwhelmingly nice job. And one thing, too, to give them a lot of credit for, they didn't. I think they wanted Arrieta all along, but they won the game of chicken. They didn't do it in a way that would be detrimental to the club. If they were 5 guaranteed years, that grade might be a lot less. And I have one more thing to say, too. That Scott Kingery deal definitely capped off the offseason. And really, that's a deal that shows that the Phillies are thinking long-term. He's not going to hurt them in any way financially long-term with this deal. It's going to be an average annual salary cap hit of $4 million a year going forward. So even if he's a complete bust, it's not going to hurt him.
I gave him an A, and there really wasn't a guy that was signed elsewhere that you could say, man, why didn't they sign that guy? You brought up a closer. I think that's a good point. But pretty much every addition was one that should help this team, plus the decision to sign Kingery showed me they want to put out the best 25 guys on the team. They want to try to win today. You can't ask for much more than that. So I thought they really did a good job. Santana, Arrieta, Hunter, Neshek. I thought they had a pretty good offseason.
Oh, you remembered Hunter. Nice job by you. Well, yeah, I promise you, I'm not copying off of Frank's test. This isn't like we're sitting at the 2 desks together and I'm looking over and saying, what'd you get for number 5? But I also said A-. I would have given them a B+ before the Jake Arrieta signing, but then the Carlos Santana, the arms in the bullpen, like you said. I said Pat Neshek. You say Hunter, Neshek, and Hunter. The 2 combinations to me are the signing of Arrieta and that unique path they took to get Scott Kingery on the roster. That bumps it up to an A- for me.
Josh?
I mean, I give them a B because of the fact that, I like the additions of Carlos Santana, Tommy Hunter, and Neshek. I think they're all moves that alleviate pressure off the young up-and-coming stars. I think the addition of Jake Arrieta definitely solidifies their offseason. To me, the big deal is they've been patient with the young players as they've come up through the farm system. I think that's going to finally pay dividends, not just for this year, but for the long term.
All right, Frank, who are the Phillies relying upon the most that you have concern over? Who's a guy that you think they think too highly of?
Right now, nobody. I think that we see that in that they have many options. And one of those options being Kingery as sort of the super sub. I think that they're in a situation now where if somebody really falters, they can just say, okay, well, if it's one of the guys that has a minor league option, like let's just say J.P. Crawford, I'm not saying I think he's going to falter, but if he does, they just say, okay, well, let's lock Kingery in there. If Maikel Franco is a bust, they still have minor league options on him. They could just say, okay, go to AAA. All right, we'll throw Kingery in there for a while. The outfielders, we already had 4 outfielders for 3 positions out there. So, again, if somebody struggles, you can always throw another one in there. Or if somebody gets hurt, between Kingery and the extra outfielder, you find a way to make this happen. So I really don't think that they're really relying too heavily on one person in particular. Back to my closer point, you might want to say that maybe, Neris as your relief ace might be the one spot. But if the Phillies are contenders, they can probably grab a bullpen arm at the trade deadline. So I don't think there's a reason to worry too much. Phillies certainly have a lot to trade, and they're pretty positioned. They're positioned pretty well to make any updates if they need to along the way.
Pete?
I look at it like Vince Velasquez is the guy that I went to, because if you had to name somebody, I do feel pretty comfortable, like Frank said, but Vince Velasquez is a guy, his stuff's always been electric. And when he's on, he's darn near unhittable. But he's had some health issues in the past. I also worry about the mental aspect of it. There's just times where I think that if his head's not on straight, that he doesn't contribute the way he's supposed to contribute.
Velasquez is interesting, too, because if Pivetta and Lively are pitching well and Eichhoff comes back, do they make a decision with Velasquez to help out that back end of the bullpen? That's always an option as well. Josh, who do you got?
Yeah, I go with Vince Velasquez, too, because he's in the starting rotation. I thought we had this conversation the last 2 years. He's going to go to the bullpen. He should be in the bullpen. He still needs to start 25 to 28 games and give me more quality starts. Until then, I think Velasquez is a liability for this team.
I went with Odubel Herrera. But maybe they're saying, Mike, we agree with you. Maybe maybe the previous
regime. You went with him before you knew he wasn't in the lineup.
Yeah, we wrote this before the lineup was made, and maybe they said. In fact, I was typing this out right when I saw the lineup, and I was like, maybe they agree with me that the previous regime thought too highly of Odubel Herrera. Just haven't been a fan of him and hitting in the middle of the lineup. I just never really viewed him as a middle of the order guy. If he's hitting 6, 7 down the bottom of the order, I find him to be more valuable. But Pete always had him up at the top of that lineup. He's too undisciplined as a hitter, and I'm not a big fan. And I thought that the previous regime relied too much on him. They gave him that contract. Maybe this regime agrees with me. All right, let's go to who is an under-the-radar player, Frank, that you have high hopes for in 2018?
Well, I think Aaron Altair is somebody that is very underrated at this point. I just think a lot of Aaron Altair. I think he's such a smooth defender. Not to piggyback your Herrera point too much, but I think Altair is the best center fielder they have on this team. And I think if you can have somebody like that as your center fielder and who can hit the way he can, we're seeing his power come around. He had 4 home runs in spring. I thought he looked really, really good this spring. I think Aaron Altair, if people aren't paying attention, and I think he's going to surprise some people.
Peter?
I went with Jorge Alfaro because, for me, that's a guy that I want to see what he can do as catcher. The bat's been okay, but I want to see more of the defense, the ability to call a game, the intangibles. Yes, hitting gets you to the big leagues, but some of those other tools are what keep you in the big leagues. Now, I know they were going with Knapp today, but it does sound like they're going to kind of split the time in those first 6 games. So that's, to me, Jorge Alfaro is a little bit of an under-the-radar player, and I want to see what he can do.
I also went with Alfaro
because is crazy. The two of you keep going with the same.
Yeah, we did not consult on these notes.
I didn't cheat off of Frank, and I didn't cheat off of Josh.
They emailed me these separately.
To me, Alfaro has a chance because you're playing at Citizens Bank Park. He has the kind of power. If you ever watch him in batting practice, Frank, you've seen it. Alfaro just has that crazy power. When he makes contact, it has a different sound. It goes a different distance. And to me, there's no pressure on him. Everybody's focused on, Hoskins and Crawford and Kingery, that Alfaro can just do his thing and grow as the season progresses.
and I went with Maikel Franco. I think maybe bringing Kingery up here kind of lit a little fire under him to say, hey, nobody's safe. He's been handed this position the last couple of years, but 6 homers in spring training. This was a guy they really thought highly of, and I think maybe bringing a new regime to work with him, having him sit with Santana. He was a top prospect. That's been a big disappointment so far, but maybe they finally have gotten it, the right attitude with him, and I think he might be the under-the-radar player this year. And hopefully, if Maikel Franco hitting number 7 in the lineup, too. Last year they had him hitting in the middle of the lineup because they needed him to be a middle-of-the-order guy. Now they're saying, hey, you're hitting 7th. Go down there and just be yourself. So Maikel Franco is the guy to me. Frank, what place will the Phillies finish in the National League East, and is that a playoff team?
I say second place. I think the Marlins, of course, they're just kind of giving up. The Braves, as we see them, they did not take the next steps like the Phillies took the next steps, even though they are a rebuilding team and have a really promising farm system. And I think the Mets are going to fall apart again, as they always seem to do. The Mets, they're still going with those same pitchers that let them down year after year. And I think for nothing else other than the Phillies are going to beat up on the Mets, Marlins, and Braves, that they're going to find themselves in second place when the year is up. And whether or not they make the playoffs, a lot of that will depend on, I think the only shot they have to do it is if they're hanging around close enough at the trade deadline and the right opportunity happens to be there. And I say the right opportunity meaning maybe there's going to be a team that's looking to shed salary, and the Phillies won't have to give up much in terms of talent and can perhaps grab an impact player just by taking the salary, and they're in a position to do so.
Pete Thompson.
As I see the Mets, by the way, just scored another run at home over St. Louis to go up 8-4. I've got the Phillies in third place. Well, he has the Mets in third. I've got the Phillies in third. I think a lot of things that I agree with. The Marlins are terrible, and they go right to the bottom. Atlanta is earlier in their rebuild than the Phillies, and I've got the Phillies in third place. I think they make a run at a wild card spot. They ultimately come up short. So I have the Nationals winning the division and the Mets in second place. Yes, it's that 1-2 punch of their starters and not much else, but that 1-2 punch is pretty good.
I have the Phillies finishing in second place as well, like Frank said, because to me, first of all, they're going to be behind the Nationals. We all believe the Nationals are winning the division, but the Marlins and Braves are going to be so weak this year with their rebuild, and the Mets are hyper-dependent on their health and luck. I see the Phillies going through stretches of scoring runs, and as long as the bullpen is stable and reliable for 162 games, this team is going to surprise some people.
I have them for second, too. I think the Phillies have a better lineup than the Mets. The key will be the health of the starting pitching in the bullpen. Gabe Kapler has said he thinks the strength of the team is that bullpen, while the Mets bullpen could be a bit of a wild card. But I think the Phillies lineup might be the difference maker. I think they're going to score some runs with this team. So I have the Phillies in second place. And I think the second wild card spot, that's something that I thought the previous team could compete for. They're better than that when we talked about this back around the new year. So I think second and the second wild card is in play. Frank Klose, how many wins for the Phils?
Right now I have them at 82, but if there's an addition, I could see them hitting 86 or 87.
I've got them at 75. Last time they won more than 73 games in a season was 2012 when they went 81 and 81. So I'm not willing to even go 81. I think they're going to be improved. You guys each have them at second and a wild card possibility. I've got them third at 75 and 87. Look, it's not 500 ball, but it's a heck of a lot better record than the last 5 seasons.
And you're the one wearing all the Phillies regalia today.
Well, just call me Negadelphia over here.
I have the Phillies winning 80 games. I think it's an achievable number. It's also reasonable considering the Phillies will have all of these interdivision games against the Braves and the Marlins. And don't forget, interleague play with matchups against the Rays and the Blue Jays. And they don't play the Yankees till late June.
I feel good saying about 85 wins. They have a good deep lineup in a very weak division. The key to getting there is finding that number 3 pitcher to step up. I think Ben Lively and Nick Pivetta get the first crack at proving they belong, and I think Lively is the guy who ends up being that number 3 guy in the rotation with Nola, Arrieta, Lively. I think those 3 give you a nice top of the rotation. I think their lineup is the second best in a very weak division. 85 wins for the Phillies this year. There's a look at the Phils as they open up the season. Frank has them for 82. Pete Thompson, Negadelphia, 73.
No, 75.
Well, it says 73 on the piece of paper here.
No, it talks about 73. 75 is the record. I put the record in there.
75 and 87. You're
75 and 87.
Josh
Come on,
at
man.
80. And by the way, Kevin Durso has 82, and so does Frank Klose. The Phillies open up the season. And
I
of course,
hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, we all hope you're wrong. It never happens. You're always right, Pete.
Thanks, buddy. That's what I'll
You realize, Pete, you're the only person who's on the underside of the Phillies over-under. Vegas has it set at 75.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those Vegas people know what they're doing.
All right, Frank. Happy opening day and another good Phillies baseball season. We'll be having the mailbag on Tuesday. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, guys, and a happy holidays to everybody.